Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Genesis 5.0, A Day in the Life of a Chief Systems Engineer, presented by Ron Kratzke. My name is Donna Long and I will be your host during today's webinar. Our lead presenter today is Ron Kratzke, Principal Systems Engineer at Vitek. He is a retired United States Navy officer with over 20 years of engineering experience managing nuclear engineering and combat systems on surface ships. Ron was introduced to the systems engineering practice near the end of his naval career while conducting mission and capability analysis for the Navy staff. For the last 15 years, he has worked as a systems engineer supporting advanced systems development for a number of federal government agencies. He was introduced to CORE in 2007 and utilized CORE to manage system development tasks on 3 different projects in the 5 years before he joined Vitek. He is now a provider of professional services in Genesis and CORE, as well as a central part of the Vitek training team. Before Ron gets started, I have a few housekeeping items. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. Please send your questions in as soon as you think of them through the question tab on the webinar control panel. Ron will answer as many of these questions as he can today, but if we do not get to your question, we will reach out to you after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded. If you experience connection problems during the live presentation, a recording will be available within 1 business day. The recording will be published to Vitek's webinar archive located on our website. At the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will open on your screen. Please take a moment to give us feedback on today's presentation and on what topics you would like to see covered in future webinars. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ron. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Donna, and good morning, all. I'm going to talk today about how you manage as a chief systems engineer in a model-based world. So what I'm going to talk about here is what this model-based approach is, and where I'm really going to demonstrate what the model-based approach is. And along the way, talk about how I would do that as if I was a chief systems engineer and I was using the model-based approach. And I'm going to talk about how I can use the model to do things in my daily life as a chief systems engineer. Now, along the way here, before I start, I want to let you know that I'm using Genesis 5, which is our latest version of Genesis, which was just launched. So I'm also going to walk through how I would do some things as a chief systems engineer, but I'm also going to show you some of the changes in Genesis 5 that are improvements over Genesis 4, some of the things we did in Genesis 5. So what I want to do is let's put ourselves in this basic scenario here. Let's assume I'm the chief systems engineer working for this design firm called Acme Company. And as a chief systems engineer, I have several projects under development in my business group. One of them is the geospatial library, and those of you that are familiar with our products will recognize the geospatial library as one of our standard samples. But I've also got 2 other projects that I'm working on: a digital camera-based surveillance system, and this new vehicle design. Let's just assume it's like a new evolutionary vehicle that we're trying to put together. So, you know, as a systems engineer, as a chief systems engineer, you get hit with 1,000 questions from 1,000 different people every day on a daily basis. And so we're going to assume here that I'm coming into work on Monday morning, and in my inbox, I get a bunch of questions from people, whether they're a project manager, or whether they're one of our stakeholders or whatever. So this is sort of a typical group of questions that I used to get asked on a basis for the week. You know, these are the kinds of things you get as a chief systems engineer, and you think, well, here's what I thought I was going to do this week is now interrupted because I've got to go answer all these questions. And the idea is that in a model-based world, we should be able to do these we should be able to answer these fairly easy and not upset our whole schedule. But on the very first bullet here, we have the geospatial library. So, you know, in our scenario, we're getting ready for systems requirement review, and the project manager is asking us, what's the status of getting ready for that? Have you identified all the verification requirements? Do you have a verification requirements matrix put together to know what we're doing on the project? And then the surveillance system guys, they want to review the top set of systems drawings. We've just started into this project, so they want to see those drawings, and they want you to send those to the project manager so that we can have a meeting on that. And then finally, the R&D team has decided they need to increase the curb weight for this new design vehicle that we're doing. The question that you have is, or that I have as Chief System Engineer, if they increase the curb weight, what does that really mean to the overall design of the system? So I've got to figure all this stuff out. Well, before the model-based world, what I would generally have on my desk was, or in my office or in my workspace or whatever, is all these paper products or paper artifacts, or these might be filed in different file management systems. But in order to find something, if I wanted to look at, where are all my requirements, what's my verification, I'd have to go search for different documents that people had put together for me to find out what those are. And so your desktop really looks like a series of documents and things that you got to go search through. And I would have to search through different things or find different things, or maybe even call somebody and say, help me find this, let's go figure this out. But what I'm trying to do in the intention of the model-based world is we have everything in some data repository. So I've taken each of these projects, right, and I've started to develop them inside a model-based world, and I have everything inside of a data repository, and I could look inside that data repository and help me find that information. I don't have to go searching through stacks of paper or try to find the latest version of the SRR or those sorts of things. So I have everything in this data repository. And if you've looked at what DoD is talking about, they talk about the digital systems engineering. What they're talking about is having all of the documentation in some sort of digital repository, which is what this data repository is. And so our data repository is really GENESYS. GENESYS is the data repository, and we can look inside the GENESYS project, and I can pull out things out of that database world to answer these questions. So the MBSE outputs down there on the bottom right-hand side, reports and documents and graphical views and other things, I don't need to go searching for them. I just need to look inside that data repository and find the things. So let's start off figuring out how we're going to do this. So if I look in the geospatial library, I've been asked these couple of questions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look into GENESYS. I'm going to look at requirements. I'm going to look at how have we completed those requirements. So I might look at a hierarchy diagram, a filter requirements list, Excel tables, Excel dashboards, and that's what I'm going to show you how to use those to answer these questions. And then I'm going to look at some verification requirements and show how those verification requirements are put together in the model. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint slides here for a moment, and I'm going to get into GENESYS. So this is GENESYS 5, right? It's the same sort of interface coming in that you saw before. And so when we look at the geospatial library here, and I've pulled this into G5, into GENESYS 5. So I'm going to open that project. And so while the project is opening, I got to think about what am I going to do? What am I going to look at? So I'm going to look at requirements here after the project opens up. I'm going to open up into the requirements part. So I'm here. One of the things I like to do, so my model is opening defaulted to essentials. I like to switch to systems engineering to do most of my work. It gives me a larger view of the model. Those of you that are familiar with our products will understand what I'm doing here. I'm just looking at a different set of classes here. So I'm going to look at requirements. So here's all my requirements. So here I have a series of requirements. So one way I might want to look at these is look at them in a hierarchy diagram. Well, let's look at some specific requirements. Let's look at the specific requirements here. And when I pick that, there's some attributes and stuff here, but let's look at a view. And I'm going to switch to the view tab up here on my screen. And I'm going to look at a hierarchy view. And I'm going to look at the hierarchy view for requirements. And notice these are the relationships I'm going to get in the model. So I'm going to get all these types of relationships here. Don't know that if that'll help me or not, but let's look at this drawing first and see what that let's see what that looks like. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look to see, are all these requirements, have I looked at all of them, and have I put those, have I made sure that they're the basis of, or they specify something in the architecture? Well, this is a good view here, but I've got some other things verified by. What I really want to do is for the SRR is make sure I've got these things refined and that they're the basis of something in my design, right? Are they the basis of some component? So maybe this view isn't the best view for me to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this view, and I'm going to open up a tailored view that'll help me sort of focus in on that. So I'll start with that requirements view. And what I'm going to look at is I'm just going to take the refined by, the specifies, and I don't need verified by. I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to remove we keep the basis of, the refined by, and the specifies, and I'm going to remove the documentation view. So now I'm going to be look at requirements. I'm going to look at how they're how they're decomposed, and I'm going to see if they're allocated to a function or a component in the architecture through that specifies and basis of requirements. So I want to save this, and I'm going to call this a requirement allocation view. So we can make these unique hierarchies, and I'm just going to save those changes, and this hierarchy will then get drawn here. So now this gives me a little cleaner view of this, and I can see that I've got these things, but still this diagram for me and for what I want to show may not be the best. I'm going to pull this out here, and I can look at properties here, and I can even expand this. I have 3 levels. I can look at it to 4 levels just to check and see. And now I can see the basis of, and it looks like all my requirements are here, that I've done this to everything. Is there a better way for me to show this? So you see this refined by here. It doesn't look like they have any decomposition. There must be a better way to do this. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to look at filters. So I'm going to look at filters, and you notice here we have a filter here called unaddressed requirements. Well, what does that filter do? I don't know what it does off the top of my head. Let me go to utilities over here, and you see filters. And if I look here at unaddressed requirements, what this is doing is it's looking at all of the leaf level requirements, right? Which means if the refined by is empty, and then for all those leaf level requirements, is there a basis of and specifies relationship for those? So I'm going to go back to my requirements here, and I'm going to select this unaddressed requirements, and I'm going to see that there's 3 requirements that I haven't quite taken care of yet: 721, 722, and 723. So these aren't quite done yet. Now I don't want to make that allocation as the chief systems engineer, but what I might do then is I might take these requirements and say all of these requirements, I'm going to relate them to a concern. So I could write a concern here. Now in the concern class, this filter doesn't work, so I'm going to go back to all entities, and I'm going to write a new concern, and I've kind of put it together here. So several requirements need allocation, and the reason I'm doing this is I want to make this concern in the database to make sure somebody takes care of it. So I made it here, and I'm going to assign it to somebody. So I'm going to say this concern is is generated by, and you'll see I can look at here. I can look at my requirements here, and notice what were those requirements again? I really don't need to know what they are. I can take and I can filter those requirements. I can put that filter in and I can see those. So I'm just going to take each one of these and add it as a generated by for this concern. And now I can assign this to, I can assign this concern to somebody in my organization, and I'm going to assign it to John Smith. So now I have this concern that I'm going to have here, and I made that concern, and that just gives me something for this afternoon's engineering meeting. And I'm going to tell John Smith, you got this concern, go take care of these because you're my requirements manager. So I'm getting a little bit closer here. So now what I really need to do is I want to take and list those requirements outside the model to show John, these are the ones I have. I can look at them here in the model, but I could also look at them another way. I could also pull those out a different way. So I could open Excel, and notice I'll just open a blank workbook here. And in Genesis, this is the same thing in Genesis 4 and Genesis 5, I can log in and log in as the administrator, of course, or whatever my login is. So I'm logging into Genesis from Excel. Okay, I'm going to select the geospatial library, and I'm going to make a table definition here. I want to look at unallocated requirements here. So let's load this table definition. And then once the table definition is loaded, I can create, I'm going to look at, I don't want to filter all entities. I want to use that same unaddressed requirements. I'm going to sort these numerically. The default category for this is requirements, and I want to pick the requirements as the place I'm going to put those back into. So this is my basic requirement folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the entity, and I'm going to look at the entity name. Then I want to look at the entity attribute, and I want to pick description. Just hit the D, will navigate me down to the D's. So I can use a description here, and I'm going to put this at the top. I can add another one. Here I want to take another entity attribute, and I want to pull up type. So I can just navigate down this way instead of hitting T, and I want to change this to capital T-Y-P-E. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to put in another attribute, and I want to pick the origin. I'll call this origin. So I'm going to get a table here of all of the unaddressed requirements, because that's what I'm filtering on here. They're going to be sorted numerically. They're coming from the requirement class. I'm going to put it to the current sheet of my Excel spreadsheet. And so I'm going to save this as, unaddressed requirements. And this is going to be a table of child, or I will say, yeah, I'll just say child requirements that have not been allocated. Say OK. Table definition is saved, and I'm going to load this. And this is just a warning that comes up that says you're going to, whatever sheet you're on, you're going to erase the information and replace it with that. So when that comes up, I'm getting this information here. Description always comes up in a long field, and I know from from experience that if I take this column width and make it like about 85, and then if I take that column and I go back home and I wrap the text, now I'm getting a complete list of these. So I'm getting all of these requirements, and these are the requirements that were in a subfolder that haven't been allocated either. So now I have a bigger list, and I might want to go back and modify the concern, but now I have this list that I can say, I can just change this, rename it. Oops, sorry about stopping that. Okay, so now I have that list. I want to add another sheet here, and I want to show you one other thing here. When we go back to Genesis, there's also some dashboards in Genesis. So if I look here, you see some dashboards. There's a requirement management, program management, testing, evaluation dashboard. Well, this might be just as easy to run this dashboard. That might give me another view. So an overall view, I've got some unallocated requirements, but if I want to get a global picture of how I'm doing with requirements on this project, I can load this dashboard. And now I have a dashboard here that shows me some things. So let's look at this. This is a dashboard that comes up automatically. Now what we've done here is we've written some background Excel script to actually pull the information out and then put these charts in here. But this is showing me the types of requirements that I have. I have 12 that aren't typed. That's another thing I might want to know as chief engineer. I have 18 that are unallocated. Here's when this shows me how the requirements were managed over time, how many were created, how many were changed or updated. This shows me errors. So I have 10 requirements that have errors. I have some concerns. I have six concerns associated with these, 6 requirements that have concerns associated with them. Not all of these have verification requirements associated with it. That's going to help me in a moment when I talk about verification requirements. Then I have verification methods, and some of these are nil. I don't have a method for some requirements. Okay, so I could also save this. I'm going to rename this to be my so now I have a requirements dashboard there. So I could save this spreadsheet and send this out. That would be a good way to show what we're doing and how far we are along with managing our requirements for the SRR. Now, going back into the model here, the second question we got asked is talk about verification requirements. How are we doing with verification requirements? And do we have a verification cross-reference matrix done or a spreadsheet done? So what I'm going to do here is, if I look at requirements here, here's my verification requirements. I kind of want to look at those a different way. If I navigate back to the spreadsheet here, I'm going to add a new page here. And up here, I had requirements, program, testing, evaluation, planning. If I look at this and load this on this new sheet, now I have some more information. So I have a series of how I've got these requirements, which ones are these verification requirements, their analysis, demonstration, inspection, and tests. Status. It looks like I've got one that was done unsatisfactory, and I've got some that are planned and some that are not yet planned. So it looks like we have to finish up some of these. I could write a concern for those things that are not yet planned also. I have some verification requirements. Some of them are fulfilled, some of them aren't. So in other words, I have verification requirements that haven't been assigned to a verification event yet. And I haven't finished all the test activities for some things. Some of them are not executed and some of them have been executed. This shows me who's going to do these tests, what organization. This is showing me Do we have test procedures written for everything? No. We have some tests, and there's some that don't have any test procedures. And this shows me the ability. I haven't started three out of these, and most of the other ones are unknown. And if I look at this, this is how I'm planning to do these. So you see some tests are scheduled in October, some in December, and some in March. So it gives me a good look at how I'm doing on my test and evaluation planning. So I can change I'm going to rename this to be the T and E dashboard. So between these three tabs and some concerns that I made, I've kind of answered that first question. Now, granted, I have to write a few of the concerns down that I pointed out, some other things that I want our guys to look at. But rather than searching and hunting and pecking and trying to pull these out on my own, I've let the model expose what's there. The last thing is we wanted to do a verification cross-reference matrix. So let me just go to this sheet here. And if you look at the table definitions that I have on this project, you'll see that there is a VCRM already in here. So here's what a VCRM. So I'm showing, if we walk through this table is pulling up the requirement, shows me it's going to pull up, I'm pulling the verified by targets into a set, and then it's going to show me the number, the name, the method, and the level for the VR associated with a particular requirement. So if I load this up, I'm in this sheet here. Once this gets populated, you'll see that I have the requirements here. I have a VR number. Some of them don't have tests, and that might be okay because this particular requirement, for example, is a composite requirement that gets broken up. But I have this basically this table that helps show what I'm doing for verification requirements on particular each requirement and whether it has a verification requirement associated with it. Okay, so I'm just going to change this to show. So now I have a VCRM right here. So as usual, when you're a chief engineer, nothing's done to your satisfaction, but at least you have a way to show here are the things that are not done, either between this or this dashboard. And we look at requirements. I have this requirements dashboard. I have these unallocated requirements that I want to work on. So this gives me a pretty good picture. We give the project manager and myself a good picture on the geospatial library, the amount of work we have to do in order to get ready for the SRR that's coming up. So I could save this whole thing, just go File, Save As, and I'm going to go to my desktop, and I've got a little folder in here where I've got some things on my desktop here. So this is my work folder for today, and I'm just going to save this as the GL requirement and VC status, VR status. So, and again, the point here is all of this information has been taken out of the model. It's not stuff I had to go look for. Didn't have to go through and hunt and peck through different things. It's all coming from the geospatial library. Okay. So going back here to my thing, I think I've answered all these and I've shown how I can do all this. So I can take this spreadsheet. This is all the information collated together. Textual representation. I can push that out to the program manager. So the next question I'm getting asked is about the surveillance system. So they want to review where we are. This project is just starting out, and they want to look at what are we doing for this surveillance system. So I'm going to open the surveillance system project, and we're going to look at the BDD and the IBD, and then we're going to create some slides to show how this project is being put together. So what I'm going to do here is back in the geospatial light, I'm going to go back to home. Here's my, excuse me, my project repository. I'm going to open the surveillance system project. And we're going to look at, I'm going to switch to systems engineering. And I'm going to pick the components here. So here I have the surveillance system. Now, I want you to note here that we have some new classes here in Genesis 5. We have something called full ports, and we have things about proxy ports and port definition. So those are going to come into play here as I look at this new system. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the views here on the surveillance system, and I want to look at a block definition diagram. Okay, so the block definition diagram is being drawn here. So I want to open this up. And I'm going to center this on the page here so you see this. Okay. Now that looks a lot different than what we used to see as a block definition diagram, because we can now see these ports. So these are ports, and ports refer to the things that are owned by the individual blocks. So these are interface points, if you will, or ports on these particular blocks. If I go over here to properties on this diagram, let me pull this over so it's more, you can see it easier. You can see here I can show the role names, so I have the role names in here. I can show the ports, or I can hide the ports. So if I hide the port, if I uncheck this show ports, this is the normal block diagram you might see without all those port names on there. But now I have the option to show those ports, because those are key elements or interface elements for the individual block. You can also notice here that I can nest ports. So I can have a port that's really nested into two ports. So think of this as, if you think of your laptop, right? Your laptop might have 3 USB connections. So I could have a USB. I could represent that as a full port with 3 or 4 sub connections that are on that. So you can see that. Okay, well, that's one drawing that I want to look at. The next drawing that I want to show for this diagram is, I want to look at the flow internal block diagram. And so I'm going to open up this diagram, and you're going to see something radically different here than what you would expect if you were a Genesis user. So now we can see these links, and we can actually see the individual link and where it connects to, and what things are being brought in and out of the particular blocks. Okay, let me just go back to my slides here a moment, and I want to highlight this. So what you're seeing here in the IBD now in Genesis 5 is the ability to show the link, but also which port that link attaches to on a particular block. And we can also give that port definition. And we can show whether the port is provided or required, or whether this item here is provided or required. A provided connection means that this block provides this information, test tracking, through the test feedback port on that feedback link. And this is a required piece of information that I have to have in the monitoring station that's coming in through this link, and it's connecting here to the test feedback port on the monitoring station. I could have called it monitoring station test feedback port, whatever I wanted to call it. And this is the required point. I wasn't using my pointer here. Let me just go back to this. So here is the port definition, user port. This is the link, and this is the name for that port on the block called the user interface block. Okay, and so this is a provided message, or provided interface. This is what's being provided by this block on this interface, and this is what's required by this monitoring station. Now, you don't have to have all of that in there if you don't want to. You can go back to the way you'd normally see it without all of the required and provided. And really this has to do with how you define these interfaces and how you define the things that are on the interfaces. So we have the option to go to this detailed level of understanding in Genesis 5, or the simpler level of understanding that we've had, which is on this side between monitoring station and camera, that we've all traditionally had in Genesis 4 and earlier. This level of detail here, you should really reserve for the lowest level of details in your design. So at the very high level, you're going to have these this control system, but as you break the system down, you'll probably get to individual message or individual required or provided items on interfaces. But you have full flexibility here and full control of that. So let's go back to the model here. So this is what I had. This is the same diagram that I showed you on the PowerPoint slide. So I want to pull in this IBD surveillance system, and I want to also look at the BDD for the surveillance system, which is, just to refresh everybody, this is this particular drawing here, okay, which I showed a little bit earlier. So the way I can do this now is if I open PowerPoint, and I'm going to grab PowerPoint here, and if you'll bear with me a second here, I kind of have to pull this over, and I'm going to go File, Open, and I'm going to open up. I already set this up as a blank presentation. So I made I now have PowerPoint open. I have this little surveillance system project here, and I've put a first slide in here. So what I can do here is I can also go into Genesis. I can grab the Genesis tab. I can log into Genesis here. Again, log in as if use your login. And I'm logging into Genesis here. I'm on the Genesis tab. And what I want to do is I want to bring some slides. I want to create some slides directly from PowerPoint, directly in PowerPoint, and pull some information in. So what I can do here is I go to Show All Options. Now this is the way I prefer to do this. You could also do it through the menus up here, but it's easier, I think, to just grab this here. And what I want to do is I'm going into components, right? I don't want to be in geospatial library. I want to be in the surveillance system. So I have to select the surveillance system. And I want to go into components. And I want to do a surveillance system diagram. And the first diagram I wanted was the BDD. And I don't want to auto title the slide. I'm going to use a custom title. And I'm going to use surveillance system components. And I want a new slide, and I'm going to insert that into my, let me check, I want to insert the slide after this one. So this is what I'm going to pull in, and I'm going to insert. Yes. And let me go back here. I want to close this. And there's the diagram that just came into in there. Okay, so there's that diagram that I had. I have surveillance system. I might want to pull this down, and I'm going to go back to home and just change the size of this. So here's the components, and I'm going to insert a new slide. Instead of the BDD, I want to go to the I want to pull in the flow internal block, which is the one I just had a moment ago. And I'm going to use a custom title here, and I'm going to say I'm going to insert that in here. And it makes that. Again, I can just grab this, pull it down. I could resize it if I wanted to. And then I'll just pull this down, and I'm going to change this to be 28 also. So now I have a good presentation here. File, save. So I've saved this. So now I have this presentation done, pulled it out of the model, quick and easy to present that. All right, moving along here. So I think that if you look at this, I did this, so I want to go right to the next one. So there's the IBD here, right? So let's go to the, that's the diagram I showed earlier. Now we're going to look at the new vehicle design project. So the R&D team decided they needed to increase the curb weight of the new design vehicle. How does that affect the design? So the next thing I need to do here is I'm going to close my diagrams here. I'm going to go back to home, and I want to go into the new vehicle project. So I'm going to open up the new vehicle project. Now in here, I want to look at the parameters that I have set up for the vehicle weight. So in this particular view, in this particular project, I've started with a set of requirements here that had some very specific parameters associated with them. So if you look at the empty vehicle weight here, I have a parameter here for empty vehicle weight of a certain amount. So I'm going to go up to components. Let's figure out where that empty vehicle weight is, and I just know that that's going to be something on the overall design. So if you look here at the new design, you'll see the total vehicle weight. If I look here in relationships, if I go down in my relationships here, you will see that this total vehicle weight is so this new vehicle is constrained by this constraint definition for total vehicle weight. The curb weight has got to be a component of that. And so all I've done is double clicked here, or I can right click and say jump to target. So now I've jumped to the target here, which is the total vehicle weight. If you look, they have the curb weight, the passengers, and then the luggage. Well, that curb weight, if I look down here, the curb weight is assigned to the system, to the vehicle frame. I'm down here. You can see how that component via system, the vehicle frame, has the curb weight. Now, if I change the curb weight, the problem is I need to know the curb weight is going to affect this total vehicle weight. How is that manifested? So if I look at the views here, I can look at the parametric view, and I can see that I have this view that shows the curb weight, the luggage weight, the average passenger weight, and number of passengers all combining to figure out the total vehicle weight. Now I just want to take a moment here and show you the ways that you can show this diagram. If you look at the properties here, you'll see that over here I have the ability to display the parameters or not. And I did the slides here so we can look at these two, and I want to just take a second here to look at these. So this is the way the parametric diagram is shown if the parameters are off. This happens to be cross-sectional area instead of total vehicle weight. But with the parameters off, it shows like this. If I click display parameters, then it moves those connection points from the frame to individual blocks on this diagram. And so now I can see that this vehicle height, for example, is assigned to the vehicle frame. So the advantage of this, having the display the parameters turned on, is that I see not only the parameter, but I see where that parameter is located in the overall design. So that's a change in Genesis 5, the ability to display those parameters either within the diagram or to leave it the conventional way, showing them like this, as to show that these parameters apply to other elements, but without showing where they are. So I have total vehicle weight here. This is the diagram, but I can see here that total vehicle weight is included in two other constraint definitions for basic motion and rolling resistance. So if I look at this and jump to this element, I can see that how it's being used here. And if I look at this parametric diagram, so the force due to basic motion, this diagram shows me that the force due to basic motion that I have to calculate includes the total vehicle weight, but force due to basic motion is also used someplace else. And so force due to basic motion is also included in the total required driving force. So if I jump to this target, this is the total required driving force. And if I look at that in the parametric diagram, now these diagrams can get very big very easily. But what I'm going to do here is just look at this. So what you see here is the total weight of the vehicle right here. That total weight of the vehicle also affects rolling resistance and force due to basic motion. And those combine to get the total required driving force for the vehicle. Because I have to overcome the force due to air resistance, the force due to basic motion, and the rolling resistance. So if I change curb weight, which is this right here, it's going to have effect on these two and this total required driving force. So again, here I could take this drawing and put it on a PowerPoint slide. I could use that to describe what the effects are or how that adds up in the overall design. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back here and let's go back to the component. We know that it's the new the vehicle frame has this curb weight associated with it. This is what it was. They want to increase this curb weight to 3,500 pounds. Okay. So now I want to use the parametric diagram or use the parameters that I have there, those constraint definitions, to show me how this has changed. So I'm going to take total required driving force. I'm going to go to the project tab. I'll pick the constraint solver. I'm going to select the constraint definition here. So this is the process of how to do the constraint solver. Next, I'm going to pick the constraint definition for total required driving force. I walked through the diagram a moment before and showed you how the individual curb weight affects those two driving forces and also then ultimately affects the total required driving force. So what this is doing here, the MATLAB, we're writing a script here that we can push all these parameters into MATLAB, and these are the dependent variables that I'm going to have to calculate. So I'm going to go next. So these are the things I'm going to calculate pending script execution. I'm going to execute the script. And what's happening now is with the MATLAB I have a MATLAB license on my computer. I'm pulling those in to execute that script. And so it's running MATLAB in the background, and it's going to come up with the panel here. And it gives me these values. Now I don't know what's changed here until I push it into update parameters. And when I do that, you're going to see it's updated. And some things have changed and some things haven't. This is updated. The cross-sectional area hasn't changed. This is updated. And these other things are updated. So I'm going to finish here. And so now, if I go back to the components, you're going to see the new vehicle. The total vehicle weight is now larger. So what's going to happen here is, and I can show that this is what it was. Now it's 4980. Okay, so I'm just looking at the two versions. This is what it is now. This is what it was before we started. So I have versioning on these. And if I go to the drivetrain, you'll see that the total driving force here, and if I look at this, you can see that the total driving force went from 91,769 foot-pounds to 106 or 10,643 foot-pounds because of the change in the curb weight, which resulted in the overall change of the vehicle, which resulted in changes along the way to get the overall change in total required driving force. So I would just pull those values out and show how those things have changed. Again, you could put those on a PowerPoint slide or make a little table or whatever to show the differences. But you have the versioning to be able to pull those out, to be able to pull out what the numbers were before and what they are now based upon the new design parameters the R&D team came up with. So, I mean, we can go on and on here, but what I was trying to show here is that if you have the model, all the information you need to answer these questions is in the model. You can pull the information out. You can look at it. You can look at a view on a PowerPoint slide. You can create a table in Excel. You could even run a report for some of these to pull this information out. And so using that model-based approach not only makes your life more efficient, but you're looking at the actual design that's there today. You can manage the system design and complexity, and you can use those views, and you can also use the model to help you manage the activities that you're doing to change the model by using the concerns class to walk yourself through those. So Donna, that's sort of my summary slide here. I know we have a few more minutes left. I don't want to run over 12 o'clock, but does anybody have any questions out there? I'll go to my last slide here. Okay. And that's how to get a hold of me and how to, and you can also send questions into customer support at the end. So any questions?
Thank you, Ron. We do have a few questions thanks to our participants. I encourage you to join the discussion and submit your questions using your webinar control panel. If you do need to leave the webinar, please take a moment before you go to respond to the quick survey that will pop up on your screen. We do have questions about the connectors. How do you get the Genesys connectors? And does that mean that you have to have that software in order to run Genesys?
Well, the Microsoft Office suite is the basic. You got to have Microsoft Office. You got to have Project. You got to have Excel. You have to have PowerPoint. When you get a Genesys license, that license comes with the connectors. So when we install Genesys, there's not only an installation of Genesys, but you install basically a connector onto Excel to create this customized ribbon bar that we have here. So again, and then it all goes back to Genesys being a .NET framework. I can create custom ribbons for the Office products because they're also in .NET. So there's no extra charge for those. They come as part of the Genesys installation, Genesys license.
Right, and just to put a clarifying point on there, if you want to use the connectors, then you would have to have them installed and licensed, but Genesys does not require you to use those connectors.
Yes,
so
yeah, I'm sorry.
Separate.
Yeah, those are separate. You don't have to have them to run Genesys, as Donna said, but when you buy the license, if you have Excel and Word and that, excuse me, it's Excel, Project, and PowerPoint connectors. So.
A question from Jack. Impressive way to have the model produce the status report, but if this would be a weekly report, can you show the deltas, or is that better done by comparing to Excel sheets?
So you don't need to change, you don't need to do the Excel sheets. You could actually go into the model and run a report to look at all the changes since a certain time. So you can go into the report and you can go into the model and run a report like that. These these diagrams are kind of static. So if I run the report, I have to, you're either going to get a whole bunch of changes from last year or no changes for today. But yeah, you can just go in and run out all changes since whatever date, and then you'll see those.
Okay. I'm kind of flipping through trying to pick out the best question since we just have a few more minutes. Can you preserve the current state to compare to a new state in the resultant end state? This is from Cindy.
A new state to the resultant end state. Well, I think what you're saying is if I made a baseline on Monday and did a bunch of work through the week and had a baseline on a Friday, then I would just compare those two projects and see what changes occurred over the week. So you would be able to basically compare the two projects and see what's changed one week to the next. There's also some other techniques you can use to as a project administrator to control the changes that people are making to the model through role-based access and things like that. But yeah, you could facilitate something like that. It has more to do with configuration management, data management than it does with looking at individual changes on a daily basis.
Okay. We have a question from Timothy. It says, do you support an interface to the Atlassian, I think I'm missaying that one, family of products, Jira, Confluence, etc.?
So we don't have a connector currently. We don't have an API that connects currently with those tool sets. But the open API nature of Genesys, because it's on a .NET environment, you can create a connector, and it's probably customized connector for your particular use. So if you wanted to pull in incident reports from Jira as concerns into our model, you could do that by just creating your own API. And it's just we don't have one right now. We may have one in the future. There's several different interface packages that we're looking at developing in the near future.
Another question from Cindy. Does the surveillance system interface with another system? Or how could you show how system of systems connects?
So if you can do that through related projects here. So let's say, not this project. I can do that. I'll just do that really quickly here. I'll take the I can take the geospatial library, for example. Here's a component, and I could say that the workstation what do I say? The workstation could be built from, or the workstation is built from, and when I do this, I can change to another model. So I can say it's built from this surveillance system. So, and I could say that it's built from the monitoring station in the surveillance system. So that's the way to create those cross-project relationships to show how this project relates to another project. But you can do that across the board many different ways. So now you see that it's built from this monitoring station, which is actually in the surveillance system project. And you'll see here that this project, the geospatial library, is related to the surveillance system, and that's the particular one.
Okay. That sounds great. Hey, thanks, Ron. This will wrap up the final Q&A. We do have a bunch of questions that we didn't get to, but it is getting on noon, so I want to respect everybody's time. So we will be reaching out directly to those people who have asked questions that we did not answer. You also can send messages to myself, dmlong@viteccorp.com, or directly to Ron. You have my email through all of the hosting information for this webinar. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. The next webinar will be with Alejandro Salado, and you can get information on that from our website and also sign up for it. That's going to be next month. Remember, at the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will open on your screen. Please take a moment to give us feedback on today's presentation or on what topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. Once again, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day.